Well, I have a good friend. We have many good friends in this program. I have many enemies, too, actually. But Ric Grenell is a good friend. Ric Grenell is really was ambassador to Germany, and actually more than that, had a lot of influence over foreign policy with President Trump, and for good reason. He's a smart guy. And then I'm alerted to this article, and I won't spend the whole interview on this, Rick. Just a vicious, vile, long New York Times piece where they even talk about your dog, for God's sakes, and the words they use, and of course they go to the likes of Susan Wright and those types of people. But what do you make of this attack? It's a preemptive attack, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually was pretty proud of it, the fact that Susan Rice hates
Susan Rice, so I'm sorry.
And,
yeah.
Susan Rice put me down for being the opposite of whatever Susan Rice wants. The fact that she thinks that I'm an enemy of hers should tell you exactly all you need to know. Look at this reporter. You know, she's written several profiles of me. And, you know, they're not really profiles. They're just hit pieces. You know, my response is I don't pay for the firewall of the New York Times. So what one reporter says about me doesn't bother me, and my mother doesn't pay for the New York Times. So I really don't care.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think's behind it? They must view you as a danger, because they don't just do things for... It's like they're going after Alito now because of two flags. They only go after people they fear, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think, they have a worldview that basically they want consensus in the world. They want the lowest common denominator of what everyone agrees with so that somehow we sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya. But that's a newsroom view of the world. That's not a diplomat's view of the world. It's not anything other than kind of reading press releases and trying to figure out, what to do in the Middle East. What I believe is that when America puts itself first, then the world sees the rule of law, capitalism. It's a whole line of healthy rules. And what I've learned doing foreign policy for so long is that other leaders are craving that, Mark. They really want there to be U.S. leadership because they know we don't conquer. They know we don't seize and take over. We're not the perfect nation, but we certainly have a perfect system, which means transparency, debate, and trying to get to a more perfect union. One of the things that I think we conservatives are frustrated with is the attack that the Democrats are doing on this system. And I can tell you, as I travel the world meeting with left, right, and center leaders, there's this whole narrative that the New York Times is pushing that I only meet with far-right leaders. I've met with socialist leaders. I've met with far-left leaders. The president of Colombia. I've met with people who fundamentally have a different worldview, but I want to extend a hand and have a conversation with them because I'm unafraid about our ideas. I think our ideas are superior. And if you have a calm debate, you're going to show them eventually that capitalism, the rule of law, democracy, human rights, all of that is good for the economy and good for your people. And so the New York Times doesn't want that. They want this kumbaya moment. And what I always say is the opposite of America First is consensus with the Europeans or the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a big issue out there that's not getting the attention it deserves, in my humble opinion. That is a story out of the Wall Street Journal on the news side that Joe Biden is pressuring, and Blinken, the UK and France and other European allies not to rebuke Iran, not to censure Iran for its breakneck speed in breaking out with a nuclear weapon. Now, what kind of a president does that? And they also say in there, he doesn't want all this coming to the fore before the election. I mean, that is unbelievable, considering what Trump was impeached for with Ukraine, for crying out loud.
Yeah, look, we need to be really trumpeting this article and this strategy from the White House. Because really, from my standpoint, Mark, this is an indication that Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken have not learned their lesson. They are still trying to engage Iran. They still believe that Iran can be brought into the international community. They want to trust Iran. They've given Iran billions of dollars. They've turned around and funded terrorists. And now they're telling the Europeans, let's not critique Iran. It's like they're afraid that if you put pressure on Iran, they're going to lash out at you. And so they're trying to bribe Iran. They're trying to walk around with kid gloves. But let me just tell you, when we had pressure on the Europeans and others, all of our allies, to not do business with Iran, to squeeze Iran, that was the right strategy. We had a lot of Europeans at the time complaining about that. I made it a top priority of mine in Germany to bring in all 50 top companies that were German companies. And I made clear to them, I said, look, the U.S. policy is no business with Iran. And so you have a choice. I'm not telling you you can't do business with Iran, but I am telling you that you don't get to do business with Iran and America. So you should choose. And every single CEO, before they walked out of my office, said, oh, no, we're with America. And I said, great, we'll follow up and make sure that you are not spending one penny inside Iran, because otherwise you're feeding a regime that systematically denies people their human rights.
But, it's a big story. It's in the Wall Street Journal. It's over the weekend, unfortunately. I guess it was yesterday. I'm not hearing a lot about this or seeing a lot about it. Are you? I mean, this is a big damn deal.
This is a very big deal because it is yet another indication of a disastrous, weak policy from Jake Sullivan. And by the way, I do believe that Jake Sullivan is the one that's running our foreign policy, except for Michigan. The political people who watch over Michigan, they're the ones who are doing the Middle East policy. But besides that, we literally have an academic at the NSC who writes white papers and is completely devoid of the reality on the ground. And he is literally now pressuring our allies to back off from Iran at a time when we should be pressuring Iran to not pursue a nuclear weapon, to not be spending money on terrorism. I don't believe that the regime is a regime that you can talk to and have a rational discussion and reach a rational decision. I believe this is an evil regime that must be squeezed and made into a pariah state, not one that needs to be enticed and walking around like we're nervous as to what they're going to do.
We're here with our friend Rick Grenell, who apparently is very unwelcome among the radical left media. It's not just the New York Times, though, is it, Rick? I mean, they're all out to kill Trump and everybody around him and anybody who might be around him. It's pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the Washington, D.C. media. And I think what we're seeing, you've seen places like the Daily Beast now imploding. They're starting to lay people off. It's not surprising to the rest of us that nobody wants to have one-sided media. They want to have real news and fair coverage. And, the New York Times, the Washington Post, I think, have completely ruined their credibility. I don't know any Republicans, any conservatives that take what they say as truth. There's always it was in the New York Times, so I better check and see if it's factual.
And the New York Times history, supporting Stalin with Walter Duranty, covering up the Holocaust for all those years, been several books written on that, helping to install Castro in Cuba. How is it that the New York Times has any reputation other than a horrible one?
Well, I think they've done it to themselves. When you look at their reporters, they're truly activists. I think they're really comfortable with it. I think that's their business model. I think they're very comfortable with just, repeating all of the Democratic opposition. If you look, Mark, at what they've done to senators, for instance, all of our candidates in different states, they have attacked using the Democratic opposition book, and they turn it into a New York Times piece. Now that's, totally coordinating with the Democratic National Committee. They're very comfortable doing that. They think, people are going to continue buying their newspaper simply to hear what the Democratic talking points are. But I think outside of Washington, D.C., people are looking for real news. They want a real debate. They want dissenting information. They want both sides of the story, and they just don't get it from the Washington media.
Mm-hmm. I think the reputation of the media is negative, but I think there's such a gap between what the people think and care about and what they think and care about. It really doesn't matter. Most of them are funded by these massive global corporations,
Well, that's it. They've become a business. I mean, you just look at NBC News and MSNBC. They're owned by Comcast. And, Comcast is telling conservatives and Republicans and the general population, come get your cable from us, buy some sort of a digital package. But what you're doing when you do that is you're feeding MSNBC, you're feeding the NBC News, and these are outlets that are incredibly comfortable being one-sided.
You were talking last time we had you here about Anthony Blinken and his connection, his family's connections to the source. This guy really seems to me like he's way out in left field. He's very strange. He has no common sense. He keeps banging his head against the ideological wall. And but his parents and so on, there are connections, right?
Yeah, his parents have funded the Don and Vera Blinken Center through the George Soros Foundation, and it's a data center. It's millions, tens of millions of dollars, and so the connection between George Soros and his work and Anthony Blinken and his work is really seamless. There's a lot of people that go back and forth between the two organizations. And so Anthony Blinken, I think, has taken ideas from George Soros and implemented them at the State Department, which I find to be, I'm very uncomfortable with the way that they've weaponized visas, for instance. They're telling people you can't come into the United States if you've undermined democracy somehow. And when you look at the details, undermining democracy just means you're against progressive policies. And so we have watched the State Department become completely weaponized under this administration. Not a lot of attention has been given to it because I think most of our media are completely consumed with Trump and the MAGA movement and trying to take them down. But remember, too, Mark, you have Anthony Blinken, who was the point person 3 weeks before the election in 2020. He was the guy that was calling around and getting 51 intelligence officers to sign a letter saying, don't look at Hunter's laptop. That is Russian disinformation. That has never really been fully vetted. I know that Jim Jordan in the House is looking at that situation. They're trying to get to the bottom of it because they want to know, how did that happen? I actually believe that those 51 intelligence officers should absolutely lose their security clearance. They manipulated election or tried to manipulate election. Some would say that they were successful. If 3 weeks before the presidential election in 2020, we didn't have these lofty intelligence officers saying it's Russian disinformation, don't look at the laptop. If we didn't have that, I do think that there would have been a lot more scrutiny under the Biden dealings, the Biden business dealings. But instead, they just kicked the can down the road by really getting these intelligence officers to risk their reputation for politics. And 51 of them were all too willing to do it.
And yet, his appearances before Congress are rare. I mean, he appeared last week, once in the Senate, once in the House. and then he's off to some other country trying to undermine it or back it or do whatever he does and so forth and so on. Do you know him personally?
I don't know him personally, but I do know a lot of the people, the career people at the State Department that are working there. And by the way, I'm somebody who believes that there are a lot of career people at the State Department who will just salute whoever is president and implement the policies. Now, there's some bad apples on both sides that have got to be cleared out. But there's plenty of people at the State Department that want to implement the president's vision. And so, they're frustrated, I think, with Anthony Blinken, because here's a guy who, hasn't come up with a peace plan for Ukraine. He's been the Secretary of State as we've launched into multiple wars. There's no demand that we have peace. And Mark, peace deals, peace agreements, those are the most difficult things to do. If you want to have a successful diplomatic strategy where we don't resort to war and we have hard-fought agreements, you got to have some diplomats who are very tough. You can't have these diplomats who want to do culinary diplomacy, which is what Anthony Blinken has been highlighting, or the art program, and having some of these soft power issues as the priority issue. You just can't do that. I still don't understand why, after more than 2.5 years, Joe Biden hasn't spoken Vladimir Putin. We're spending billions of dollars. They're not even speaking. So where is the peace deal? And by the way, no one is suggesting that a Minsk, or a Minsk II agreement or the future of whatever we're going to call it is an easy thing to negotiate. You have to have territorial integrity for Ukraine. And I think you've got to have conversations with the Russians to understand exactly what's at stake here. But you're not going to get it done through culinary diplomacy. You've got to actually pick up the phone. You've got to talk to Putin. You've got to have a strategy where frontline diplomats who are tough as nails are negotiating and using every tool that the United States has. We have sanctions tool. We have the moral high ground tool. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can use and that we should be shifting to be able to reach our goals. But it starts with a phone call.
And yet on the other part of the globe, in the Middle East, they keep trying to pressure Netanyahu, and the Israelis do not want now a Palestinian state. They keep threatening them. They're using Saudi Arabia. The deal that the Israelis and Saudi Arabia are going to cut under the Trump administration, they threw a wrench into that, talking about the Palestinians. They act like they control Israel, like they attack the leadership, the elected leadership in Israel, more than they attack their Iranian friends and so forth and so on. What is that all about, trying to pressure them into something they're not going to do?
You look, the way I view this is it's really about sequencing. You've got to get the sequencing right. You can't start putting a pier in a raft on the beach to bring in humanitarian aid when we still have hostages and Hamas is still in charge. You have to be able to get the hostages returned. By the way, many people say that most of the hostages are dead, or if not all of them. And so I still believe that we got to get the hostages home, get their bodies home if that's the case. But that is the focus. You've got to pressure Hamas. And then after that, we're never going to be able to deal with the Hamas government. That leadership, all of them, need to be crushed. And we need to have the Arabs helping us do that. And through my conversations, the Arabs want to help us do that. But they need U.S. leadership. There's only one country that can call the meeting, that can get everybody in the room, and that can tell people to behave and focus on the goal. And that is the United States of America. I worked at the UN for 8 years. There's not a single thing around the world that gets done without U.S. leadership. And we don't have that with Anthony Blinken. He's not able to walk into a room and have the participants all be in the room and use the bully pulpit to say, Everybody is going to do something. We are not leaving this room until we get the hostages back. I really believe that we have lingered for so long. Many hostages were killed because we didn't have U.S. leadership. Many more lives, more Palestinian lives, have been killed and decimated simply because there's not enough pressure on the international community to go in together and get the hostages returned. This should be something that the Saudis do, the Turks do, the Emiratis do. Bring in the Qataris. But they're not going to play their part if the U.S. isn't able to be there. Think about this, we've got Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden trying to wrestle these people into a room. That's a disaster. Everybody looks at those two and says, this is weakness personified.
Well, Rick Grenell, if I'm asked, I doubt I will be, you should be the next Secretary of State. You'd be fantastic. And if they won't confirm you, you get a recess appointment. You can hang in there for a few years regardless. I think it's going to be political hand-to-hand combat because I do not think the Democrats will accept anything but a
well, let me just say this. I think every single person that Donald Trump nominates will get through because the Senate will be controlled by the Republicans.
That would be great. But there is that little problem with a filibuster, But anyway, Rick Grenell, I want to thank you for all you do. The New York Times, just remember, they were for Stalin, they covered up Hitler, and they installed Castro. So you're on the good guy's side, they're on the evil side. You take care of yourself, brother.
Thanks, my friend.
All right, God bless. He is the best. He's fantastic. We've gotten to know him. Just a good guy.